Hey there, my fellow designers and creatives. Hope you're all doing well. Welcome back to a brand new video on the channel. Today, we've got a very interesting and exciting video where we're going to be doing an app review of two apps. As you may already know from the title, we're going to be reviewing Fold Money and the new Cred Money that was launched by Cred. They did a phenomenal campaign. So let's actually see how well it stands good and what we can learn. So let's get started. Now, why speedsters? Well, I'll get to that in a bit before we start looking at the screens. There's a point that I want to make. But before that, a super quick disclaimer. Now, this video is not about making fun or putting down Fold Money and over appreciating Cred. I think first of all, it's unfair to make a comparison because Cred obviously has an upper hand here because it's a bigger company. They've been there for a long time. They have a much stronger product design and engineering team, and Fold Money is still small, right? So it's definitely an unfair comparison. So that's not really the objective. However, the objective is to learn from things. Even though we are essentially comparing, the objective here is to learn, and you can still learn from good things and bad things as well. And that's how you grow as a designer, right? So I want to make that very clear. So of course, we're going to be comparing Fold Money. This is the screenshot of Fold Money. We're going to be comparing that with Cred Money that you see over here. And not just that, we will also be comparing it with my redesign of Fold Money that I had done. So for those of you who don't know, I have an entire series where I redesign the Fold Money from scratch. And so I'm going to be talking about the design decisions I took when redesigning that, comparing it to that with Fold Money and Cred Money, right? So we're going to be looking at three things and it's going to be super interesting. Now, a little bit of context before we go in. A couple of days ago, I asked this question on my Instagram where I asked people, to all those who use Fold Money, if you had access to Cred Money, would you use it over Fold Money? And almost 50% of the people said they're going to use Cred Money. And actually, if we do the math for the 15% who said they will use both, so it probably comes down to a 60-40 percentage, right? So 60% of the people are going to use Cred Money, and still 40% are saying they're going to use Fold Money. Now, it's important to understand what's happening here. Now, the main reason why somebody would want to move to Cred Money is because of three reasons, right? The first one is that it is now a single app for all the needs, right? While Fold Money introduced the credit card feature, you can actually pay your credit card bills with Cred, right? So there's essentially no need for Fold Money because you have all the information on Cred. The second is obviously Cred has a superior design. No matter, even though it's a controversial design, I think it stands out much better than Fold Money's design. And lastly, Cred Money has a much better tagging system. And when I got access to Cred Money, there was not even one single transaction that I had to tag. All the categories were well tagged, and even all the merchants, or basically the recipients and payers, were properly tagged. So there was not even one transaction that I had to tag. But today, even with Fold Money, I have to tag a lot of transactions, right? So even from a product standpoint, Cred seems to be doing very well. And it's not just that. If we think about the future, right? Budgeting is a feature that is really important for financial planning and for keeping track of your expenses and incomes. And this is a feature that both the companies have not yet built. So this is going to be something that's going to be very interesting. And if Cred does this, it'll be one super app for all financial needs. And even things like portfolio values. Fold Money already has this feature right now where you can look at it, but I totally believe that it's not really well designed and it's not really solving a problem. But I think Cred would end up doing a much better job. And why am I talking about this? I'll come to that in a bit, but just stick with me. And I put out this video a couple of weeks ago where I spoke about how to identify a company that values design, right? And so one of the key points I mentioned in that is that fintech apps need to build trust through design. And design is not just visuals, it's about the entire experience of using the product, the usability of it, the problems that it solves is also part of design, right? So fintech's app really have to build this trust through design. And the reason I'm talking about this is because a couple of people actually replied back to my story and they told me why they would prefer Fold Money. So let's go through the reasons, right? So the first one is that it's easier to tag my transactions on Fold because tags are better grouped and they have better icons to identify them, which reduces my time to tag them, right? So while Fold Money has categories and subcategories, which I will obviously talk about when we look at the screens, Cred only has a single level of categories, which this user finds it to be very important. But like I said, Cred Money obviously does all the tagging for you and you don't have to tag any other transactions. It does a very good job of tagging. So Cred Money is already winning over there. Second one is Fold Money has just less cognitive load. This is something that I would sort of disagree with, but I guess people have different opinions over here, so I'm just going to let that slide. And the third is I don't have a Cred account, so giving my financial info is something that I'm not comfortable with. So of course you have issues with privacy and concern, although I don't really understand why, because if you're giving your information to Cred, how is it different from giving it to Fold? There is no guarantee that Fold Money is not going to do something that Cred is doing. Of course, whatever Cred is doing, there's a good chance Fold is also going to do it. And I don't understand what is actually being safe over here, right? So the question to ask here is that are people sticking to Fold for the wrong reasons, right? Why are people using Fold instead of Cred? Are these reasons strong enough to be sticking to Fold? And so what this could ideally mean if these reasons are not good enough is that Fold could continue to ship more features with poor design. Just having good design is not going to be enough for Fold. It needs to solve problems and introduce more features in order to keep up with Cred Money. And essentially what this becomes is this becomes a race, right? And you're fighting for each other, and essentially you're fighting for customers or basically a user base, and you will have to start focusing on design, shipping better features and more features, right? So if one company comes up with budgeting feature, then another company probably also would have to come up with it, right? Fold Money is going to have to improve their UI. And customers are also not going to be very happy to keep switching apps. They would ideally want to stick to one app. So it becomes a big responsibility for that one particular company to ensure that the customers stick to their product and use it, right? Because a lot of effort would have gone into it and it's expected to be used, right? So that's the reason this becomes some sort of a race at the end of the day, which is very similar than what we see today, right? You take Swiggy and Zomato, you see it. You see neobanks, you see it, right? So essentially it becomes a race. So with that being said, let's jump into Figma and actually look at some screens. All right, so let's get started. Now, the first thing I want to talk about is the visual language that they have chosen. Now, when I was making the redesign of the Fold Money app, in one of the videos, which is basically about defining a visual language, I mentioned that there are 4 key aspects to what makes a good visual language, right? And there are basically 4 components to think about. The first one is basically surface colors. As you can see, you have 2 surface color. Then you have dividers. Then you have strokes or borders. And the last one is shadows, which I added over here. And I mentioned that out of these 4, you want to have a maximum of 2 of these elements. It can be any 2 elements. Just have 2 of those elements and your UI is going to look a lot cleaner. Any more than 2, it's going to create a problem. So in this case, when I did the redesign, I went ahead and created the design with 2 elements. So one was with shadows and the one was with the surface colors. I didn't add any strokes or dividers. And if we see Cred Money, they've taken a different approach where they don't have shadows, they don't have surfaces, but they have dividers and they also have strokes in some places. As you can see over here, they have strokes over here, over here. Even though they have it on smaller elements, it is probably taking up a decent amount of space, right? And I think dividers is their main thing, right? So here they've used 2 of their components, or maybe we can just consider it as one major component of visual design and then a small component, right? So this is already something that's really great. And of course, the interface looks a lot cleaner than Fold Money you can see over here. Now, of course, typography also makes a big role. As you can see here, there are too many font sizes. There's a lot going on. So it's visually noisy. That already complicates things even more. And of course, Cred has a simpler visual language. All right, so let's go section by section and we're going to critique it. So the first one is the bank that you have, of course, with your account number and then your account balance, right? And I think this is pretty straightforward. We have that over here as well. And of course, for Fold, you have the credit cards feature over here, but in Cred Money, you have it in a different section. So here you sort of enter another mini app inside the Cred app to access Cred Money. But in Fold Money, obviously it's outside. So that's what it is. Now, one interesting thing to observe here is that they removed the chart. So Cred doesn't really have any sort of chart. And when I was redesigning this in this particular video, I mentioned that having a chart doesn't really make any sense because it doesn't really convey anything. It's just a visual representation of how the balance has been over the past month. But at the end of the day, what is your current balance is more important than how it fluctuated, over the month. But even though I mentioned that, I still did add the chart mainly because with this visual language of having shadows and this double surfaces, Without the chart, this area was looking really blank. It wasn't really looking appealing because it was just in this one container that had really nothing. So visually, I had to add the chart, even though that's not the reason you should add a chart. You should add it only if it makes sense. But I did add it only to compensate for the poor visual language that I chose. And I chose that because I wanted to have some sort of parity with the Fold Money app. If I was given a chance, I would have definitely done it like Cred, as I had mentioned in that video, and keep things as flat as possible. Okay, then you have view details, which will open up the bank details page, which I will show in a bit, but you can do that over here as well. Then we have some key actions that you can take. In Fold Money, you can't really take any actions, so there are no actions to be taken. Here, you can do all of this. Next, we have transactions. Now, in Fold Money, they don't have transactions on the home screen. And the main reason for that is they have a tab itself where you can access transactions, right? So it's right there. So you don't really need to show it on the home screen. And that's also pretty much the same reason I didn't choose to have it over here, because we have an extra tab. But in Cred, they don't have a system of tab in this mini app. So obviously you have to have some sort of entry point to this, and obviously showing the top 3 transactions over here and then having a CTA to view all transaction makes the most amount of sense. And I think over here, people would want to see their recent transactions, right? And we're going to get into the transactions section a little bit later, but for now we can move on. Recurring payments is a super cool feature, and I'll dive into this a little bit more deeper later, but showing what are the payments that you have to make this particular month and incoming makes a lot of sense. It might not be useful for anybody. For me, I just have a Netflix subscription. So for me, it doesn't really matter that much. But people may have SIPs, they might have EMIs, they might have rents that they have to pay. And these are recurring payments. So obviously, knowing the total of how much is going to be a recurring payment for that month is very important for people to know. Obviously, it doesn't help me because I don't have payments like that. But it definitely helps a lot of people. And that's also a part of entire financial planning. And I think this is a phenomenal feature. And it's actually designed very well. I'm going to talk about that in a second. And Fold Money, unfortunately, doesn't really have a feature like that. All right, then you have cash flow. Now, there's a lot to explain in cash flow because this system that they have is actually flawed, and even Fold Money's system is also flawed. Now, let me explain. So basically, you have incoming, investments, and you have spend. And incoming is basically money you have earned. Investment is money you've invested, and spends is basically expenditure. And here you have 3 entry points, which is incoming, investments, and spend. You can see the number of transactions and the value. Now, it's represented very well with a bar chart so that you're able to compare things very easily and very quickly and see if there are some sort of inconsistencies or there was something that went wrong. Another thing here is that they've highlighted both of these in green. I don't know why this is green in color because essentially investment is money that's gone out of your bank account. But it's a good thing because this is your money. So maybe that's why they've kept it green, but I'm not entirely sure why this is green. And I don't even know if this has to be in a different color. They could have just kept it black and I don't think it would have mattered, right? But if you see over here, in cash flow, in Fold Money, you've got incoming, which is basically the same thing as incoming. You have outgoing, which they're calling as spends over here. Then you have invested, which is investment. And then you have something called as left. Now, I spoke about this concept of left, which is basically how much money is left. But it doesn't make any sense because if you look at incoming, so let's say you earned some money and then you spent some money and you also invested some money. What is left is going to be over here. But that's actually doesn't make any sense because what is left is your bank balance. That's what is left. Because looking at this from a monthly standpoint doesn't make much sense because there is a possibility that you might have invested or you might have spent more than how much you earned. So what you have left is going to be in a negative balance because you would have used up your savings for the extra expenditure, right? So having this, how much you saved that month is totally irrelevant, right? How much you spent is more important, how much you earned is more important, and what is your current bank balance, that is more important, which is why Cred also didn't really have that, and which is why I also didn't do it. Instead, I went ahead and did very similar to what Cred did. And instead of a vertical bar chart, and I didn't really do a vertical bar chart because I knew it would be too many boxes and rectangles and it would look really ugly. So a pie chart made a little bit more sense for me from a visual standpoint. And I pretty much did the exact same thing where I put down incoming, investments, and spend. Now, another thing here is that Cred is giving you the ability to change the time period so that you can view the cash flow for a particular time period. Now, I decided not really to do that because you pretty much would want to look at it for that particular month. Of course, you have the ability to change it to any custom time period once you go tap inside this, and you can go inside this to the next screen and you can do it all of it there. But I think Cred decided to do it over here. Of course, you can do it in each of these 3 levels that you go inside also, but there's another additional thing. Now, one of the most important things I want to talk about here is this concept of cash flow. Now, let's take an example. So here I have 2 transactions, and I have one which is basically debit, outgoing, and then I have expense, and then I have credit and incoming, right? And debit is basically money that has gone out of your bank account, and expense is basically an expense, right? Let me explain what this is. So let's say the first transaction, I bought something for 5,000 rupees, all right? Let's say I bought a pair of shoes. Now, essentially, this is an expense, right? Because money went out of my account, and I'm also treating it as an expense. So nothing's wrong over here. Now, let's say I buy something else for 2,000 rupees, all right? I don't know, let's say maybe a power bank, right? I spend something and buy something for 2,000 rupees, okay? Now, this technically should be an expense. But what happened was when I spent this money, something went wrong with my network. So this money was not registered or accepted by the merchant, some technical issue. Now, what this means is that the money actually went out of my account. There was actually a debit in my account, like you can see it in the statement. However, the money didn't really reach the merchant, so it's hanging somewhere. And after 24 hours, it's going to come back into my account, which is basically a credit or incoming. It's going to come back into my account as 2,000 rupees. So which means there are going to be 2 entries in my bank statement. One is one that's debited and the other one is credited for the exact same account. And so essentially, this means that this is not an expense. My total expense for the month is just 5,000 rupees. It's not 7,000 rupees. But what you see over here is that this debit or outgoing, which means money that's gone out, is 7,000 rupees, and money that I've earned is 2,000 rupees. But in reality, that's not true. So what's happening over here is that when you see cash flow, this incoming also includes this credit transaction, and this investment or spends includes this debit outgoing transaction. So essentially what this means is that if you actually want to know how much did you earn, right? Maybe you have some dividend, you have some interest, maybe you have some salaries, some freelance money. That may not be the total value as you see over here, because there could be these reversals that came in as well, right? And so even the expenditure could show you the wrong amount technically. So when you look at this from a cash flow standpoint, which is basically an accounting term, it's correct because that's money that has gone out, money that has come in, but that does not necessarily mean it's your income and your expense, right? For example, if this investment is 50,000, I might have done a UPI for 50,000 and that would have gotten cancelled. And so that money would have come back to me over here, right? So essentially, I'm going to have 50,000 incoming and 50,000 investments, which is giving me the wrong impression over here. It's not true. My expense is not 50,000 and my income is not 50,000, right? So Cred should come out with this feature where you can tag these transactions as reversals, and they should not be counted as your incoming investments or spend, because you don't really want to know your cash flow. You want to know what exactly is your incoming, what exactly is your expenditure, and what exactly is your investment, irrespective of how the money moved around in your bank account, right? I think that's something that's very important to understand over here, because when I saw this for the first time, I knew something was wrong, and when I started digging deeper, I realized it is considering even reversal transactions over here. And Fold Money also does pretty much the exact same thing. Fold Money also follows the same approach. However, Fold Money lets you tag the transactions as a reversal. So if there's a debit, it lets you tag the appropriate credit for which the transaction was reversed. So if I want to know what is my expense for a particular time period, I may get the wrong answers all the time, right? So that's something that really has to be fixed over here. Now, another thing I noticed over here is that sometimes it can also be untagged. Now, one really great thing that I love about Cred Money is that when I got access to Cred Money, not even one transaction was untagged. And this value you see over here is just one transaction of an entire year. So this is August 1st of 2023 to August 4th of 2024. So this is an entire year, and in entire year, there was only one transaction which was untagged, as you can see over here. It was only one transaction that was untagged. But in Fold Money, half of the transactions are still incorrectly tagged, or I still have to tag them. And there in Fold Money, you have a concept of category and subcategory, which just complicates things even more, right? So Cred has kept it very simple with one level of tagging system. There are no subcategories, there's just one level, and that makes it very easy. Another interesting thing to note here is that untagged transactions are always expenses. And if there is a transaction which is incoming, but it is untagged, it is added under incoming. It's not going to become as an untagged income transaction and an untagged expense transaction. I'm not entirely sure why that is the case. If you guys have an idea, let me know in the comment sections below. Would love to understand why they're only having untagged transactions as expenses and not untagged incoming transactions. All right. Now, the last thing here in Fold Money is that they have this new feature of investments. And of course, this is not my true value of investments. Now, this is a feature that Cred could also introduce sometime in the future, where it can calculate your entire net worth. And I think a lot of apps are doing it. And knowing your net worth and your portfolio value is an important part of financial planning and staying up to date with your finances. So this is basically the race that I was talking about. I don't know how many people are using this feature, but I think people would definitely use that feature if Cred introduced it, right? At this point, this feature of investments is not really adding any value to me in Fold Money, at least for me. I have my other apps where I can keep track of things much better. I don't know how much of a value that this is adding. Definitely a good to have feature, but is it really getting enough adoption? I don't think so, right? Anyway, so that is all about the home screen. Okay, next we can look at the bank details, right? So when you tap on bank details over here, or you tap on this card, you're going to see the bank details. Now, I don't have my redesign of that because I didn't go ahead and redesign this particular screen because there was some issue, but let's quickly check. So I think it's pretty straightforward over here. The graph is here, which shows you, and it makes sense to have the graph over here in essence. And they've also added the graph over here. You have the ability to switch between months. There's nothing too crazy about the graph. It's pretty straightforward. You've got your account details. You've got all of these things, right? You also have recent transactions over here. Not really sure if it's really needed. I don't think, this is any different than what is on the home screen. So I think they could get rid of recent transactions, but it's there. So, I guess it's fine. An interesting thing here is the interest summary. This is usually not helpful to anybody at any point of the year other than when you're sort of filing your taxes or you're trying to do some calculation. And interest is a very nice, good to have feature. So it shows you all of that over here. It shows you the projected interest. I don't know how helpful this is or who even wants this information. I think they could have just showed total interest earned this year, and I think it would be helpful. Pretty easy to track rather than look at your bank statements as well and sort of calculate things, right? So good to have feature, but nothing fancy over here. So let's move on. All right. So now we can look at recurring payments. So over here, you have the overview of recurring payments. You have both outgoing and incoming recurring payments. And as you can see, I have only one over here. And this one is not yet sort of debited, right? This will happen later this month. But if you see over here, when you tap on it, when you tap on see all, you get this more detailed view. Now, visually, I think there's a lot of noise over here because you have too many numbers and, here the alignment is not right and there's too much going on, right? It's very unclear as to what is upcoming, what is paid, and it takes some time to understand what is happening, right? There could be some transactions or some payments that I've already done. Some is yet to be done for this particular month. So there's going to be a lot of information. I think they could just, have everything on one side and clean this up very well. They could probably have upcoming as a global information over here because it's quite global as what is upcoming. And then you could have paid as another option over here. I don't think you really need a total over here, but something could be done to really clean this up. Right now, there's too much visual noise and, too many font sizes here. So I think this screen definitely could need some work. The other thing here is that they give you this thing called as the pro tip. I don't know if this is different for other people or how this actually works, but it's basically giving you a total of how much you need to set aside every month. I think it's pretty obvious what the number would be when you see over here. I don't think you need this tip, but I don't know if this is actually scalable or they give you better tips or contextual or personalized tips. I'm not really sure, but I think this is probably not really adding any value. So when you tap on Netflix, you get this detailed view, and I think the screen has been done really well, and you can actually see all information, right? When it has to be paid, when it is due, what is the amount, and basically the history as well, right? It's really good to have. And I think this screen is very much personalized depending on which one category it belongs to. It could be investments, loans, people, rent, or something else, right? Subscriptions, it could be a lot of things. They have a couple of options over here, and the experience on each of the screens is a little bit different. Like if you have loan, then you have a different experience, right? And you can also see the payment history over here. So when and all was this particularly paid for? When did you miss it? When did you not miss it? It's really, it really helps you track this information really well, because all these cases are very niche cases. You don't think about this every day. You think about it probably once or twice in an entire year when you're actually doing some sort of calculation or planning. And I think coming here and finding that information is super helpful. All right. So now we can look at the category overview, which is pretty much one of the most important parts of the app. So basically, when you tap on any of these, which is incoming, investments, or spend, or you can even tap on these three entry points here as well. They do the same thing. You get to the details screen. All right. So of course, on the top right, you have your time period, and obviously you can filter for any time period you want. And I also had sort of done the same thing where you could filter for the time period, as you can see over here. So this is for November 2023. Now, this arrow that you see over here is basically to switch from incoming to expenses to investment. So if you swipe, you would see information of investments, and if you swipe again, you would see expenses, right? And surprisingly, I also ended up with the exact same thing. Now, I sort of put investment under expenses, right? But if I had considered investment as a separate item, we would have three tabs, and I actually did speak about this when I made this video. And I thought it made sense to quickly switch between expenses and incomes. Now, Cred obviously did it in a different way where you could swipe to have three separate screens, but I decided to do it in the form of a tab, which is essentially the same behavior and same interaction. It doesn't take much effort, and it's pretty much the same thing, just that the way it's done is a little bit different, right? But what you see over here in Folds Money Design is something that's sort of completely different, right? The date filters are different. There's no chart, there's no total amount, and there's just so much going on over here, right? And Fold Money, they actually have the same information over here as well. If we see over here in the beginning, they have something called as a spending summary, and essentially you would see the top 5 items over here, and again it is being repeated over here, right? So it's not really adding any value, right? Which is why I also decided just to do it like Cred, which was basically show all the categories over here in the second section, and on the first level we just keep it very high level where we just show the incomes, expenses, and investments, right? Amazing. Now, obviously they use the pie chart over here in this case. They could have used the bar chart as well. I don't think there's any problem with that, but I kept using the pie chart like they did. So it's pretty nice that we both are following the same approaches, and I have different colors over here. Now, when I was doing the iterations for this, I also came up with a concept where we would have one color and then we would have shades of the different color, right? But the reason I didn't really go with this approach is because it would be hard to identify by the color code over here, right? And then I would probably have to make all my decisions based on looking at this information, and the pie chart will not really help that much, right? It's going to add some value, but not that much, right? And I also sort of tried this color, right? And then I realized that maybe I should just have 3 different colors or multiple different colors, right? And so what Cred has basically done is sort of followed the same approach that I did, and they've taken one color and then they've had multiple shades of that color, right? Now, essentially, it's quite hard to understand what is services, what is wallet and payment, right? But it looks decent, looks pretty good. But at the same time, most of your attention and decision making would be over here, right? And I think it's good to see that both of us ended up thinking in the same direction. Now over here, you've got the percentages of how much it constitutes, which makes a lot of sense. And I also have that over here. I put down the number of transactions over here. Maybe it's not important, maybe it's important. It's definitely a good to have, so you can sort of see how many transactions there are for a particular category. Here they are not really showing it, but I guess that's okay. And in Fold Money over here, they're showing only the percentages, they're not showing the number of transactions. And here they've used this sort of progress bar type indicator chart, but I've definitely gone ahead and used a pie chart because that made a lot more sense to me, right? Now, another section that they have is called as top transactors, which is basically the merchants that you have paid to. Now, I think this is so important and very important to have, essentially because it will give you at a very high overall level which categories did you spend the most amount of money in or least amount of money in, and to whom, right? And I think this information is very helpful to understand at a very high level, right? And I think they did a good job over here. And then you also have the past trend to show you how the past trend for incomes has been for the past 6 months, right? And if you compare it to my design, I also have that, but I don't really have it in the form of a bar chart, but I could scroll over here on the right side to the right, and then it would show me information for the previous month, and I could scroll again and it would show it for the previous month. So I sort of have that functionality because it's important to know, but it's Cred, I think, probably is a much better way to do it, where you could see all of it in one glance and you can obviously compare and you can see averages and all of that. But the reason I didn't do it was because visually it would look really bad to do it, and I would have to use a simpler flat design approach if I had to pull that off, right? So that's that. Now, a couple more things over here. So if I highlight all of this, there are 3 types of details you can look at. So you can look at all the transactions. So if you tapped on July transactions, you could see all the transactions, all the incoming transactions, which makes a lot of sense. In our case, both Fold Money and I don't have that at an entire level because we obviously had the transactions tab, which was a separate tab over here. So if we go to the home screen, we had this transactions tab, and with this we could quickly filter for incoming and see all the transactions, right? So there was no need to show the list of all the transactions for that particular period. Showing the categories was more important, right? So that's one difference. The second difference is definitely the categories. So here, if you tap on services, all right, you would see the trend number 1, which I think should not be the first thing. The trend should probably be the second thing. But I guess if you have too many transactions, then you wouldn't be able to look at the trend. So maybe it makes sense to show the trend over here. And you also have the total, right? And here also they have the total, but it's represented in a very different way. Of course, here Cred and Fold Money are quite similar in the way they're showing the trends. But the problem here is that this visually looks quite off, and then, you know, there's so much space that's being taken, right? I think this could be done much better visually presented. And then you have all the transactions for that particular month. So in December, there were 2 transactions, right? Very similar over here, right? And I also pretty much did the same thing, but without this chart, I gave the ability to swipe so that you could see the transactions for the previous month, just like how you could see it over here in Cred, right? And then here what I did was I added the ability to search for merchants over here. Here, merchants, which would be the next one over here. So if I tapped on Razor Pay or whatever it is, I would see all the transactions for that particular period. So this is at a merchant level. Now I also have the same thing over here where I could tap on this to filter things at a merchant level, but it would be under a category, right? So here, all of these could be in different categories. Even though it is from the same merchant, it could be different categories. But in most cases, it is going to be the same category from the same merchant, right? So for example, so a lot of this is dividends. So it is going to be the same category. And this is savings account interest. And this is incomes from the courses, right? So essentially, all of this would be one category, one merchant, right? So they could sort of put it under services itself. So here under services, you could see all the transactions for the particular services and at a merchant level, but they just decided to have a separate view for merchant level, right? But in my case, I've combined merchants under the categories over here, right? So that's one tiny difference. However, in Fold Money, they don't really have this concept of merchant. So if I actually want to know how much did I invest in Zerodha for a particular month, I would have to calculate all of that on my own, right? There's no way to figure out what it is, right? And I don't even know how to look at all the merchants that I have. So basically, I can't see who are all the transactors or the merchants for a particular month, right? There's no way to sort of do that over here. I have to go individually and look at it, so I can never get a total. So that's one big drawback over here, and I think it's important that we have this view somewhere. So here they have it right up front, and here I have it under the investments, right? So looks like Cred and I are pretty much thinking along the same lines. All right, moving forward. Now we have transactions. Now, there are two things. Obviously, we look at the entire transaction section, and we're also going to look at the transaction list item. Now, I mentioned in one of the separate videos, which was dedicated to transaction listing, is that this design is not at all scalable. There are too many font sizes. There's a lot much going on, and it looks very weird where there is information that is filled in one case, information is not filled in another case, right? And so I decided I had to definitely streamline this. So as you can see over here, my design and Cred design is pretty much very similar. So you've got a logo over here, and here we have an icon for each category. Of course, it's not done with the logo, it's done with a category, but I don't know how Cred was able to fetch these logos. I think they probably sat down and pulled all of the logos and created a database. And I think that would be a lot of effort for Fold Money, but it would make a lot of sense. And I don't think they did it because their visual design doesn't even allow for it, right? So if you ended up having a logo over here beside Netflix, then it would be even more crazy because there's a lot of data points, right? So I don't think that's the reason they did it. They somehow decided to focus and give emphasis on the category. So here, essentially, I could also have the same structure. So we have a circle, we have a title, we have a description, and then we have the amount, right? Now, one interesting thing to note here is that both Cred and Fold have organized all of this at a monthly level, right? So it's 30th, 24th, 23rd, 20th, right? And I decided to do it at a day level. So all the transactions for 30th November, all the transactions for 29th November. Now, the reason I chose to do this is because when I did benchmarking and competitive analysis, almost 9 out of 10 apps had the split by a date level. And the only reason I don't go with this day level approach is because if I'm searching for a particular date, it becomes really hard because I have to sort of scan through everything and it's extra cognitive load. So if I see that in the title itself, I can quickly scroll, get the date that I want, and then look at the transactions, or as this is going to be a little bit extra cognitive load according to me, right? Here they have the tag. I added the tag here as an icon, which I could easily replace with a logo. And then you have the time over here. So they have not shown the time over here because they don't have obviously enough space, but I had time, so I showed that, right? Another interesting thing here is that maybe I'm not able to show it properly over here, but the way they represent positive and negative values, right? And I think every app does it very differently, and it's pretty hard to understand what is the right way to do because everybody does it differently, right? So if you see Fold Money over here, they have plus for positive, minus for negative. I decided to have negative only. I decided to have minus only for negatives, and for positives, I would just keep that as it is. But Cred does it a little bit different. So I quickly updated the screenshot. Here, as you can see, they're following a different approach where for positive, they're showing the plus and making it green, which makes it very quickly to understand which is a positive and which is a negative. And for negatives, they're keeping it black without any sign, right? So all of us are pretty much using a different approach. And when I did a lot of benchmarking, also everybody's following a different approach. So I think at the end of the day, whatever customers think is the good, whatever feedback that we get, and at the end of the day, your visual opinion also makes a lot of sense over here. So it's fine. Nobody's right, nobody's wrong, as long as it works. Just because they're showing both doesn't mean it's wrong. Just because I'm showing only for negative and not for positive doesn't mean it's wrong, right? But the most important thing to understand is that this is a much scalable design, and so is this also a scalable design. I could add the subcategory over here. Or what I could have also done is I could have removed the time over here, and I could have added just the category, very similar to what they're doing over here. But the problem is then it would be repeat where I would have the icon and then I would have the category name. It's not really helpful. If we have more data points that we could fit, that would be great. Because we were showing the icon for the category over here, I decided that we could use time as a data point, right? And also the big difference here is that since this is at a day level, we could show the time, but since this is at a month level, they have to show the date, and there probably is no space for the time, right? And if they added the time, it would pretty much look a little bit ugly and, too much of visual noise, right? So I think they didn't do that for that reason, but of course, makes a lot of sense. Couple of other things over here. Here they have the filters up front, and here I kept it inside. I don't know how often that's going to be used. Maybe it's going to be used often, maybe not, but it's hard to say right now. And here they have the search collapsed and I have the search open. I did have an option in search where I sort of collapsed the search and kept it as an icon, but here looks like Cred has been doing it. The assumption is that maybe people don't search for a lot of transactions and they would just filter and scroll. But I thought that maybe search is an important thing, right? I don't think there's any wrong or right answer. At the end of the day, it's very visible for people to go ahead and start searching. The experience won't really change. Okay, next, let's go to the transaction details. So Cred and Fold seem to have a very similar approach over here. So you've got the logo, you've got the merchant, and of course the order is totally messed up over here. You've got paid to over here and you've got the tag over here, but it pretty much seems to be in the right order. You've got all the basic details. I'm not going to go into it too much. One thing that I would definitely want is this basically feature where you can exclude from the cash flow. So essentially what that means is if there is a reversal transaction, you don't want it to be affecting the cash flow, right? So you can come and then you can turn this on. And basically this goes away from your cash flow. And so then your cash flow, which should essentially end up being your actual income or actual expense, because that is not being calculated over here, right? So Fold Money has solved this problem. So if you exclude this transaction from the cash flow, assuming it's a reversal transaction, then this 50,000 investment is not going to be considered as an investment, right? It's going to be removed from your outgoing cash flow because it was some sort of a reversal transaction, right? So I think Fold has done a good job over here of adding this feature, and I think Cred also should do the exact same thing, and that will actually help users understand what was actual expense and what is actual income, right? Now, my visual design is definitely not great over here, and I know that. And of course, there's a lot of limitations of what you can do because you have this surfaces and they added dividers. I didn't want to use dividers anywhere. I was very much limited with what I could do. And as you can see, they've also split it, into so many groups and sections, right? But here they've just used dividers, a single element, and it's very well done, right? And I also would have probably pretty much done the same thing if I did not have to go with this double surfaces approach, right? But it's fine. This is what we have to work with, right? So there's nothing much to talk about here in the transaction section. I think it's pretty straightforward and fine. So we can move on to the next one. And this is tagging, right? So we can look at quickly a tagging experience. So I took one of the items and I had set it to dividend just in case, just for this example, and I wanted to switch it back, right? So I tapped on dividend. I got a list of all the categories, and as you can see, they don't have too many categories. They just have probably, 15 to 20 categories, and they don't have subcategories. Fold Money has the concept of subcategories. So under investments, you would have mutual funds, fixed deposits, you've got a bunch of things, but here they just have very high level, which I think is honestly more than enough. You don't really need to categorize every single transaction with a subcategory. It's not really that super helpful. But Fold Money decided to do it anyway, right? But here, let's say I change it from dividend and I tapped on services, and then I can go ahead and confirm. And then here what it does, it goes ahead and selects all the respective transactions and automatically selects it, right? But in Fold Money, if I can come here and let me see if I can find it in the tagging experience. Let's see if I can sort of search for it here, right? As you can see over here, here I selected and I had to review one similar transaction. Of course, the UI over here isn't really great, but I have to manually select all the transactions over here, right? And then I have to apply because, for example, this one is the one that I selected and then this one is not selected. So I have to do it, right? But here in Cred Money, all of it is pre-selected, which makes a lot of sense, right? And it's showing all the information. I can deselect if I want, and then I can confirm, right? And then it sort of goes ahead and does this nice animation where the amount is counting up. Now, one last thing before I end the video, I saw a bit of an inconsistency which sort of kept bothering me in a lot of places. So if you see over here, all of these pills or chips that they have, all of them seem to have different styles. And so here the height is completely different. Here you've got black color and then you've got one which is grayed out. And then here for filters, again, you've got one which is in blue in color. Now I understand that they are sort of doing two different things. For example, these two are tabs, but essentially these are not. However, I think some sort of good consistency would be nice, like at least even if the heights are the same, right? Here the height is more, here the height is less, right? So I think some sort of visual consistency is, I think, important, because when I was using it for the first time, it took me a while to understand what would happen when I tapped on a button, right? And I think that's super important. And so you've already got like 1, 2, 3 styles over here, and there should be another style somewhere. I think I saw it in the filters section probably. Yeah, here's another one. So this is transaction. So here you've got another one. So this one is just pure black with a black color stroke. And if we see the first one over here, yeah, right. So it's the same color, but the height is different. And I think, they could try to make everything consistent. So here they could at least make this black in color to have some sort of consistency. But yeah, that's only a very tiny nitpick. Now, another quick thing that I want to point out is the page transitions. It's obviously not possible to show that over here, but if I were to explain, in a lot of places where we have a button on the right over here, you might not be able to guess from the screen how this transaction actually would work, right? But when I tapped on payment history, first of all, it's showing a drop down over here. So I thought something is going to open up over here. I should have an arrow mark or a chevron that faces the right side, right? Because you're opening a brand new screen, right? So I think very small visual inconsistencies like that, I think, could be easily fixed. So if you say show history with a chevron that's facing on the right, then it means that it's going to open a new screen, right? The weird thing here is that the screen opens from the right and you have this cross button, right? Which essentially both of these screens are the same. So when you tap on Netflix, this screen comes from the right side and you have a back button over here. But payment history also should pretty much have the same arrow mark, but because it comes from the right side and you shouldn't have a cross button. So I've seen these inconsistencies throughout the Cred app. It's not just Cred Money. I've seen it throughout the app. And I think that is visually weird. And the reason I'm saying that is because they have that pattern being used everywhere. So all the screens that they have this arrow icon, this coming in from the right. Same here for the transaction details. All right, let's see if we have any other screens. Yeah, I think that's about it, right? So even here, the bank details, all of this is coming. But when I tap on some cases where I tap on things like show history or even the filters, right? I didn't really show the filters, but if you come over here and you tapped on amount or type, it would show the filter screen with the X button over here on the top right? Instead of having an arrow mark on the left, right? So I think these visual inconsistencies should be really fixed, because sometimes it can be a bit weird for the user because they don't know what they're going to expect. So that's my final nitpick. So I hope this video is really interesting to learn from. I spoke about a lot of interesting topics, something at a very high level, some things at a very granular level. So hopefully it was fun. So that's pretty much it for this video, guys. Thank you guys so much for watching. Hope you guys really enjoyed it. If you did, let me know in the comment sections down below. Make sure to leave a like and subscribe to the channel for more amazing, awesome content. And I'll see you guys in my next video. So till then, take care and bye-bye.